Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. My name's Robert. Welcome back to my channel. I'm here today to do my Friday reads. This has been a really interesting experimental week for me because of these weekly read-alongs that I've been doing, and because of the June readathon for Reading Women's Month. I've decided to break away from my normal pattern of reading one book at a time, and I decided to go to the dark side a little bit, which would make Sean and Lindsay very proud. And this week I actually was reading 3 books simultaneously, and I can see their point why this has its advantages. If you're in a book that you're not particularly loving, it gives you breaks from that book and keeps you reading anyway, whereas if I'm reading a single book at a time and I'm not loving it, it can slow me down because I don't want to pick it up as readily as I might if it was a book I was really enjoying. So it's been an interesting experiment. I think I'll continue with it again for a couple more weeks and see what happens. My goal each week is usually to read 2 books. My Goodreads target for the year is 100 books, so 2 books a week gets me there. This week I actually read 3 books, or 2 2/3 books anyway. I'll finish the 3rd one later today, so I guess 3 books in a week is really what I accomplished. The first book that I read, actually no, before we get into the books that I read this week, let me just do a quick update for the June read-along schedule. As you know, this week's read-along is from the 100 Essential Novels list, and it is the first volume, A Question of Upbringing, the first volume from Anthony Powell's 12-novel series called A Dance to the Music of Time. And so that's the one that I'll be doing a video for on Sunday. Next week, we switch to the 100 Great Books list, and the selection for next week is Henry David Thoreau's Walden. The week after that, we go to the 20th Century Backlist, and we'll be reading Jane Smiley's 1,000 Acres, which, as I mentioned before, is a resetting of the King Lear story. And then the nonfiction selection, the final week in June, the nonfiction selection is The Lost City of the Monkey God by Douglas Preston. So that takes us to the end of June. And as I said, my video for the Anthony Powell novel will be coming Sunday. Okay, so back to the books that I read. And of course, the first one of those 3 is the Anthony Powell book. And I'm not going to say much about that here, since I am going to do a whole video on that for Sunday. But as a spoiler sneak preview, I will not be reading the other 11 books in this series. I just was left cold by the entire book from start to finish. Fortunately, it was only 230 pages, so it didn't take terribly long to suffer through. The second book I read was my first selection for the June readathon for Reading Women's Month, Reading Women's, whatever we're calling this. And it was a selection of essays by Samantha Irby called Meaty. And a lot of booktubers that I follow have raved about this collection of essays. They said it was hysterical, it was really touching, and so on. And I have to admit, it was not for me. I did not enjoy it much. I can understand why people like Samantha Irby, because she addresses a lot of issues that I think are really important to address. I'm all for funny essays. I'm a huge fan of David Sedaris. But I felt right from the very beginning, and maybe even more so in the beginning than later in the book, that she's just trying way too hard to be edgy, to be funny, to push the envelope and make everybody uncomfortable, and it comes across as trying too hard. I did not find this collection funny at all. There were a couple of places where I kind of nodded in humorous agreement to something she said, but for the most part, it just felt like somebody's trying too hard, and I did not see this as funny, so I was really disappointed. She does talk about some issues that I think are really important, and I mentioned these in my Goodreads review last night, but one of the things that she talks about is her chronic illness. She has Crohn's disease, which is just a terrible thing to deal with because you never know when it's going to strike, you never know what you're going to eat's going to set it off again, and it's just got miserable side effects. Now, as somebody who has a different chronic illness, a lot of you know I'm a diabetic. I can completely commiserate with what she's going through in living with a chronic disease. But I think she goes overboard on the TMI. She's talking about every aspect of her body in ways that's mostly for shock value. A little of that goes a long way. 250 straight pages of that just gets tedious to me. But that didn't bother me nearly as much. The grossness that bothers some people about this book didn't really bother me. She spends a whole lot of time talking about her bowel movements and her sexual encounters, neither of which offended me. I just found it old after the 15th time. What did bother me, though, is that she is aggressively proud of the fact that she's a 30-something-year-old woman who is incapable of living an adult life. She's incompetent at most aspects of adulting, and she's proud of it. And she boldly asserts it again and again that she's an arrested adolescent. I don't find that funny. I don't find it charming. I don't find it endearing. I find it kind of sad and pathetic. She spends 250 pages bitching about how fucked up her life is, but she's the reason that it's fucked up. I just don't see the appeal. This book grew out of her blog, and it feels like a bunch of blog entries. They're short, they're not particularly in-depth. There are a few that I think are more profound than others, and those really got to me. But for the most part, it just sounds like somebody who's just trying to get an effect out of her readers, and it's a cheap effect. The essays that I really enjoyed, I say enjoyed, that I think really stuck with me is one of the early essays in the book where, as a young teenager, she's essentially having to care for her dying mother by herself, and she doesn't know what she's doing. And that's really touching, that she's having to go that alone. That was awful for her, and I completely was into that particular set of essays. She complains a lot about men, but then she keeps dating horrible men. And then at one point, she starts trying to contemplate what it would be like to date women because she wouldn't have to deal with men. And she has a hilarious essay. This one I actually did find funny because she's just scathing about the female roommate she's had and how that would never work. The essay that I liked the most, and I don't remember the name of it, is when she's talking about what it would be like to have a boyfriend. The perfect relationship situation would be for her boyfriend to have his own apartment in their same building so she can get away at times. And I completely was nodding my head with that one because I'm one of those people that just needs to have alone time. It's not because my partner's done anything wrong or is, out of line. Just sometimes too much togetherness is too much. And after living alone for the last 10 years, I've realized that there are some huge advantages in that. But I could see wanting to be in a relationship with somebody who lived in my same building. That would be pretty awesome. So I thought that one was really cool. And I surprisingly found some of her recipes. There's about 5 or 6 different essays where she includes a recipe for something. I found those really interesting. So there were parts of the book that I thought were interesting, but her sense of comedy to me it's childish. It's going for an easy, cheap effect. And it seems like the people who love this collection tend to be young. And so it's an age thing. I'm an old fart, I admit it. Anyway, so I probably won't read anything else by her, but I'm glad I read this collection because everybody's been talking about it and I wanted to know what the deal was. The third book that I've been reading, I'm 2/3 of the way through it and I'll finish it later today, has really surprised me. It's the 5th of the 6 shortlisted titles for the Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction, and this one is by Patrick McGrath. It's called The Wardrobe Mistress. Before I even read it, I had seen a couple of really horrible reviews of it, including one by Mel from Mel's Bookland Adventures. I saw her Goodreads review where she gave it 1 star and just basically threw it away in disgust. And so I wasn't expecting much out of this one, but I have to admit, I'm really enjoying it, and I'm not entirely sure why. The story is set in 1947 in London, so it's shortly after World War II is over, but of course there are a lot of things still going on in England as far as economic recovery and everything's still a mess. But it's set in a community of actors. On the opening of the book, the Wardrobe Mistress, the title character, whose name is Joan Grice. She is a wardrobe mistress for a theater company. Her husband, Charlie, whom she just calls Gricey all the time, is a famous actor, has just died. He apparently had some kind of an altercation with Joan's son-in-law, Julius, and he fell down some stairs and died a day or two later. And so it opens essentially with his funeral. And they have a daughter named Vera who's married to Julius, and Vera has also become a pretty successful upcoming actress, but she's very high-strung, almost to the point of neurotic. And Julius is a theater producer. He used to have a theater that was destroyed in the bombing, but he's still involved in the community. So it's a very close-knit group of associations. And at the time of Charlie's death, he's been playing Malvolio on stage. And his understudy, of course, has to come in and finish the run of the play. And Joan is asked to go see a production, just basically to stay out and stay current. And she does. And she sees the man who's playing this, and she is just completely struck by the fact that it's Charlie all over again. He has the same mannerisms, he has the same vocal inflections, the same motions. There's almost a seamless transition between Charlie and this understudy. And she is completely taken with that. She realizes, of course, he's younger and that he's pretty poor. She meets him after the show and tells him, in fact, that she really liked his performance. And they start to form a relationship. At first, she's not interested in the understudy, but she sees in the understudy the spirit of Charlie. She's convinced that Charlie is still with her through this understudy. And she's grieving, of course, but she's kind of taking it to an almost supernatural level where she thinks she has heard Charlie's voice, and then she meets this understudy and realizes, oh, Charlie's alive, still in this guy. And she feels sorry for him, so she brings him back to her apartment and takes some of Charlie's suits, kind of one at a time type thing, and retailers them, alters them for this young understudy. And they start forming a relationship. And so for the first half of the book, it's kind of this budding relationship between Joan and the understudy, and Vera getting back into the theater after taking a short break. And you think, okay, it's going to be an interesting story of how she deals with this, what is turning into a romance between these two people. And then halfway through the book, you get this kind of surprise, and there is a secret about Charlie's life that Joan did not know anything about, or she turned a blind eye to, but it seems like she just was not aware of it. And I'm not going to tell you what that secret is, but it's kind of a shock. And the second half of the book kind of drags Joan into a political intrigue of sorts. And I'm curious to see where this is going to go. And there's also some more complications ahead for them in this relationship. And so I'm fascinated. I like the writing style. It's clear to me. I like the story about the theater community and what's going on there. I think one of the things that bothered Mel, she mentioned something about magic realism in a review. I think she's referring to how Joan thinks she sees her husband in this young man, but I'm reading that more as just her grief and her imagination is playing tricks on her, and I don't think that's entirely unreasonable. I have known people, and I've even experienced this myself, where you've lost somebody and then you see them everywhere, or you hear their voice everywhere, things like that. Your memory can play tricks on you, things like that. And so I'm just fascinated with this book so far, so I'm really happy with it. It's funny how two different readers can have so radically different responses. It reminds me of my response to The Idiot, when so many people have loved that book and it just completely turned me off. So I'll see how the last third of it goes. Looking ahead to this coming week, in addition to reading Walden, I'm anxious to pick up Frederick Bachman's new book. I just received my copy yesterday or the day before in the mail, and it's Us Against You. Or is it? Yeah, it's Us Against You, I think is it. It's a second book following up on the Beartown title. That was his story about the youth hockey team in Sweden, which is probably my second favorite of all Bachman's books. So I'm really looking forward to reading that one. And I've got a memoir of Rwanda. I think it's The Girl Who Smiles Beads. I may get that title wrong, I'm not sure, but I've got that out from the library and I need to get to that right away, so I'll probably start that one this afternoon too. So it's been an interesting week, not my favorite week in terms of the best books I've read, but a very productive week in the fact that I've read almost 3 books. And I'm looking forward to the rest of June's read-alongs and the rest of June's books for the Reading Women Readathon Challenge. Hope you're having a great week and that you have great plans for this weekend. I'm going to spend some time on the golf course if we don't get rained out. We've been having a lot of the spring thunderstorms that we normally get this time of the year in the afternoon, so it makes it challenging to get out. And then I will see you again Sunday, probably afternoon or evening, with my read-along for the Anthony Powell A Question of Upbringing. Have a great weekend, everybody. Bye.